Hi everyone, welcome to this video on rewiring the anxious brain, where we explore how you can reshape your mind to break free from the grip of anxiety using the fascinating science of neuroplasticity. In today's world, so many of us are living with chronic stress, worry, and fear. Whether it's daily pressures from work, school, or personal life, anxiety has a way of taking over our thoughts and locking us into a vicious cycle. But what if I told you that you don't have to live with it forever? Thanks to neuroplasticity, the brain's remarkable ability to change and adapt, you have the power to actually rewire the way your brain responds to stressful thoughts. It means that even if anxiety has been a part of your life for years, you can train your brain to create new pathways that promote calmness, positivity, and resilience. But first, let's break down what's actually happening in an anxious brain. When we're caught in anxiety, our brain tends to follow the same well-worn neural paths, like a road we keep driving down over and over. The more we engage with anxious thoughts, the stronger these connections become. It's like strengthening a muscle in the wrong way. And this, of course, can make it feel impossible to think differently. The science of neuroplasticity, however, offers hope. Neuroplasticity is a concept that tells us the brain is always evolving. It's not static. It changes in response to your experiences, thoughts, and actions. And the more we focus on positive, healthy behaviors, the more our brain begins to rewire itself, forming new pathways that allow us to respond to situations with more peace and less panic. Think of it this way: every time you consciously challenge an anxious thought, meditate, or practice affirmations, you're sending your brain signals that build new highways of calm, rather than strengthening those old paths of fear. It's a process, but it's a process that works. Over time, you'll find that the thoughts that once triggered fear or worry have less power, and you'll have a greater sense of control over your mind and body. So, in this video, we're going to explore practical, science-backed techniques for rewiring the anxious brain. These are methods you can start using today, whether you're dealing with general anxiety, panic attacks, or just a feeling of constant unease. Stick around, and I'll walk you through how tools like mindfulness, cognitive behavioral therapy, and positive affirmations can help you retrain your brain, breaking the anxiety cycle and leading to a calmer, more centered version of you. Ready to begin this journey to a rewired, more peaceful brain? Let's get started. Alright, now let's dive into the concept of neuroplasticity. It's a fascinating and powerful mechanism that plays a key role in how we can rewire our brains to overcome anxiety and other mental health challenges. But what exactly is neuroplasticity? Let's break it down into simple terms. Neuroplasticity, sometimes called brain plasticity, is the brain's ability to change and adapt throughout your life. While it sounds technical, the idea is actually quite simple. The brain can reorganize itself by forming new connections between brain cells, also known as neurons. This process allows your brain to change its structure and function in response to learning, experience, and even injury. It's what makes the brain so adaptable and dynamic. Here's an easy way to think about it: imagine the brain as a network of roads. When you're born, these roads are pretty basic and unpaved. Over time, through experiences, learning, and habits, your brain starts paving these roads, turning them into well-worn paths that your brain uses again and again. Some of these paths are helpful, like the ones you use to remember how to ride a bike or solve a math problem. But sometimes, these paths can become highways for negative patterns, like anxious thoughts or bad habits. Now, neuroplasticity means that we're not stuck with these roads forever. You can pave new paths. You can essentially reroute your brain. For example, if you've spent years reinforcing a path of anxiety, constantly worrying about the future or feeling overwhelmed, you can reshape that path by introducing new habits, thoughts, and behaviors. Eventually, with enough practice, the old anxious road starts to fade, and the new, healthier one becomes the path your brain naturally takes. To give you a deeper understanding, let's talk about how neuroplasticity works. Your brain is made up of around 86 billion neurons, tiny cells that transmit information. When you think, feel, or do something repeatedly, your neurons communicate through electrical impulses, strengthening the connection between them. This is often summarized in the saying, neurons that fire together, wire together. So, the more you engage in a particular thought or behavior, the stronger the connection between those neurons becomes. Let's say every time you feel stressed, your brain follows the same neural pathway that leads to anxiety. Over time, this becomes a strong, automatic response. But if you start introducing calming techniques, like mindfulness or affirmations, you're creating new connections. At first, these new pathways might feel weak or unnatural, but with repetition, they get stronger. The more you use these new paths, the less your brain will rely on the old anxious ones. Now, here's where the science gets even more interesting. Research has shown that neuroplasticity isn't just for the young, it happens throughout our entire lives. While the brain is most malleable in childhood, scientists have found that even adults can make significant changes to their brain structure. In fact, a study published in Nature Neuroscience showed that neuroplasticity can even be enhanced with specific mental training exercises, proving that it's never too late to change the way your brain works. This means that whether you're 20, 40, or 60 years old, your brain is still capable of rewiring itself. Another key piece of research comes from a landmark study at the University of Wisconsin, where scientists found that regular meditation led to changes in brain structure. In the study, participants who practiced mindfulness meditation over several weeks showed increased gray matter in areas of the brain associated with emotional regulation and self-awareness. This demonstrates how powerful neuroplasticity can be when we engage in positive practices. So how does this all relate to anxiety? When you're anxious, your brain has likely built very strong connections around worry and fear. You might automatically respond to certain triggers with a racing heart, shallow breathing, or spiraling thoughts. These responses are like deep grooves in your brain, well-established paths that your mind takes without much effort. But, through neuroplasticity, you can retrain your brain to respond differently. Here's an example. Let's say you're afraid of public speaking. Every time you think about giving a presentation, you feel panicked, and your brain reinforces this connection between public speaking and fear. But by using techniques like visualizing a positive outcome, practicing deep breathing, or repeating affirmations like "I am calm and confident," you're sending signals to your brain that this situation isn't as dangerous as it feels. Over time, your brain rewires itself, creating a new association with public speaking, one that's less fear-based. One of the most exciting aspects of neuroplasticity is how quickly change can occur. Research from the University of London found that even short bursts of mental training can cause visible changes in brain structure within a few weeks. This means that with consistent effort, whether through therapy, mindfulness, or positive self-talk, you can begin to reshape the anxious parts of your brain and build new, healthier responses. So remember, neuroplasticity isn't just a scientific concept, it's a tool you can use in your everyday life. By being intentional about the thoughts you nurture and the behaviors you repeat, you can change the way your brain functions. It's not magic, but it's the next best thing, the science of change, and the key to breaking free from the anxiety cycle. In the next section, we'll explore the anxiety cycle in more detail and discuss how you can start rewiring your brain to overcome it. But for now, remember, your brain is always changing, and with the right approach, you can guide that change in a direction that supports your well-being. Anxiety is more than just feeling nervous or worried. It's a complex process that involves both our thoughts and physical reactions, and unfortunately, once it gets started, it can become a self-reinforcing loop. Let's start by looking at how anxiety typically begins. The cycle often starts with a trigger. This could be anything that causes worry or fear, a looming deadline, a difficult conversation, or even a thought about something that might happen in the future. For example, you might see an email from your boss asking for a meeting, and your mind instantly jumps to, "What if I did something wrong?" That thought triggers anxiety, and your brain kicks into overdrive. Once your brain registers the trigger, the physical symptoms of anxiety kick in. Your heart rate increases, your muscles tense up, your breathing becomes shallow, and you might start sweating or feeling dizzy. This happens because anxiety activates the fight or flight response, a natural survival mechanism. Your brain is sending signals to your body that there's a potential threat, even though, in most modern situations, there's no real danger. At this point, these physical symptoms fuel more anxious thoughts, creating a feedback loop. Your mind starts racing, thinking, what if I mess up, or I can't handle this? And because your body feels so uncomfortable, it reinforces the belief that something bad is about to happen. This is where the cycle can become especially tricky. To cope with these uncomfortable feelings, many people fall into avoidance behavior. For example, if public speaking makes you anxious, you might avoid giving presentations altogether. Or if social situations make you nervous, you might stay home instead of going out. In the short term, avoidance feels like relief because you're no longer facing the situation that triggered your anxiety. But here's the catch: avoidance reinforces the anxiety. When we avoid the things that make us anxious, we're teaching our brain that the situation is dangerous, even if it's not. Over time, this reinforces the anxiety cycle, making it even harder to face similar situations in the future. The more you avoid, the more your brain believes that avoiding is the only way to stay safe. So, let's break it down. The anxiety cycle has 4 main steps: trigger anxiety, physical symptoms, avoidance, more anxiety. Once this cycle gets going, it can feel overwhelming and difficult to stop. But here's the good news: just as neuroplasticity allows us to build new, healthier pathways, we can also use it to interrupt the anxiety cycle. Let me share a real-life case study that shows how breaking the anxiety cycle is possible. This is the story of Emma, a 28-year-old graphic designer who struggled with social anxiety for years. Every time she was invited to a meeting or had to present her work to clients, she'd immediately start feeling anxious. Her heart would race, her hands would sweat, and she'd have a sinking feeling in her stomach. Like many people, Emma's first instinct was to avoid these situations. She'd often call in sick on presentation days or ask a coworker to present on her behalf. In the short term, this avoidance gave her relief; she didn't have to face her fear. But over time, her anxiety around meetings only got worse. Just the thought of presenting made her heart race, and she began to dread work altogether. After months of feeling stuck, Emma decided to seek therapy, and that's when she learned about the anxiety cycle and the concept of exposure therapy. Her therapist explained that by gradually facing the situations that caused her anxiety, she could train her brain to respond differently. But it wouldn't happen all at once; it would take small, steady steps. Emma started with very low-pressure situations. For example, she practiced giving presentations alone in front of a mirror or to just one friend. At first, she still felt anxious, but with each practice session, her brain began to adjust. The more she exposed herself to the situations she feared, the more she realized they weren't as dangerous as her brain had made them out to be. After a few months of practicing in low-stress environments, Emma worked her way up to presenting in small meetings at work. She still felt nervous, but the overwhelming anxiety she had once experienced was starting to fade. Her heart rate no longer skyrocketed, and she found herself able to stay more present and focused during meetings. By continuously exposing herself to the situations she once avoided, Emma was slowly rewiring her brain and breaking the anxiety cycle. This process of exposure helped Emma take control of her anxiety. Instead of letting avoidance feed her fears, she used neuroplasticity to create new associations with public speaking. Over time, her brain rewired itself to see these situations as manageable, rather than terrifying. Emma's story is a great example of how understanding and addressing the anxiety cycle can lead to meaningful change. By recognizing the triggers, being aware of the physical symptoms, and slowly facing her fears instead of avoiding them, Emma was able to interrupt the cycle and create new, healthier neural pathways. The same is possible for anyone who feels stuck in anxiety. Next, we'll talk about practical tools and techniques you can use to start rewiring your own brain and breaking the anxiety cycle, just like Emma did. But remember, it's all about patience, persistence, and taking small steps. Let's get started. Now that we understand how anxiety works and how the brain can change through neuroplasticity, let's dive into rewiring techniques, practical methods you can use to break free from the anxiety cycle and create new, healthier neural pathways. The key here is consistency. Just like exercising a muscle, rewiring your brain takes time, patience, and repetition. Let's explore some of the most effective techniques supported by research. One of the most powerful techniques for rewiring the anxious brain is mindfulness meditation. This practice helps calm the mind, bring awareness to the present moment, and reduce overthinking, all of which can interrupt the anxiety cycle. Mindfulness encourages us to observe our thoughts without judgment, which can prevent anxious thoughts from spiraling out of control. Research shows that mindfulness can literally change the structure of the brain. A groundbreaking study by Harvard neuroscientist Sarah Lazar found that after just 8 weeks of mindfulness practice, participants had increased gray matter in the hippocampus, an area of the brain associated with learning and memory, and decreased gray matter in the amygdala, the brain's fear center. This shift explains why mindfulness can lead to reduced anxiety and a calmer mind. To get started, try short, daily mindfulness sessions. Even just 5 to 10 minutes of mindful breathing or body scans can begin to create new neural pathways. Apps like Headspace and Calm can guide you through simple mindfulness exercises, helping you build this habit over time. Another highly effective technique for rewiring anxious thoughts is cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. CBT is a therapeutic approach that focuses on identifying and challenging negative thought patterns. The core idea is that our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are interconnected. By changing how we think about a situation, we can change how we feel and behave in response to it. CBT helps us recognize cognitive distortions, which are irrational thought patterns that fuel anxiety. Common distortions include catastrophizing, expecting the worst possible outcome, or black and white thinking, where we see situations as all good or all bad. By practicing CBT techniques, we can train our brain to think more realistically and calmly. Research from Stanford University shows that CBT is one of the most effective treatments for anxiety disorders, with long-lasting effects. It's been shown to reduce symptoms in 60 to 80% of people who complete a full course of treatment. The beauty of CBT is that you don't always need a therapist to get started. There are many self-help books, apps, and online programs that guide you through the process. We touched on this earlier with Emma's story, but exposure therapy is another powerful tool for rewiring the brain to respond differently to fear. The basic idea of exposure therapy is simple. You gradually expose yourself to the situations that trigger anxiety, but in a controlled and manageable way. Over time, your brain learns that these situations aren't as dangerous as it originally thought. A study published in the Journal of Anxiety Disorders found that exposure therapy can lead to significant reductions in anxiety symptoms, particularly for conditions like social anxiety, panic disorder, and phobias. By confronting fears instead of avoiding them, people can weaken the neural connections that associate certain situations with danger. To start using exposure therapy on your own, make a list of situations that cause anxiety, ranking them from least to most stressful. Begin with the least anxiety-provoking situation and slowly work your way up, allowing your brain to adjust to each one. Another technique for rewiring the brain involves positive affirmations and reframing negative self-talk. Anxiety often comes with a running commentary of self-doubt and fear-based thoughts, like, "I'm not good enough" or "I can't handle this." These negative thoughts strengthen anxious pathways in the brain, so it's essential to start replacing them with more empowering beliefs. Studies have shown that repeating positive affirmations can activate the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for planning and decision-making. This activation helps us think more rationally and respond to stressful situations with more confidence. It's important to choose affirmations that resonate with you, such as, "I am capable of handling challenges" or "I am calm and in control." Repetition is key. Try saying them daily, especially in moments when you feel anxiety creeping in. While it might seem surprising, physical exercise is a highly effective tool for rewiring the anxious brain. Exercise increases the production of neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine, which are natural mood stabilizers. It also promotes the growth of new brain cells in the hippocampus, which is involved in emotional regulation. A study from Princeton University found that regular exercise can rewire the brain to be more resilient to stress. In the study, rats that exercised had reduced anxiety responses in stressful situations, thanks to increased neuron growth in areas of the brain linked to emotional regulation. For humans, even just 20 to 30 minutes of moderate exercise, like walking or cycling, can have a calming effect and help break the anxiety cycle. Finally, let's talk about breathing techniques. When we're anxious, our breathing tends to become shallow and rapid, which can trigger more anxiety. But with conscious, deep breathing, we can calm the nervous system and activate the parasympathetic response, the body's natural way of relaxing. Research from Harvard Medical School shows that deep breathing exercises, such as 4-7-8 breathing, inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 7, exhale for 8, can lower heart rate, reduce stress hormones, and help the brain shift out of fight or flight mode. These techniques are easy to learn and can be used anytime. These are just a few of the many techniques you can use to rewire your brain and break free from anxiety. Whether you start with mindfulness, CBT, exercise, or affirmations, the most important thing is to be consistent and patient. Remember, neuroplasticity is all about repetition, so the more you practice these techniques, the stronger those new neural pathways will become. Now that we've explored some powerful techniques to rewire the anxious brain, let's take a look at how these methods work in real life. Sometimes, it can be hard to imagine how these strategies apply to everyday situations, so I want to share 2 examples of people who successfully rewired their brains to overcome anxiety. These are the stories of John and Sarah, 2 individuals who faced different forms of anxiety but used similar techniques to transform their lives. Let's start with John, a 35-year-old software developer who struggled with social anxiety for most of his adult life. He would avoid social events, meetings, and even simple things like answering the phone because he feared being judged or saying the wrong thing. Over time, this avoidance only made his anxiety worse, and it started to affect his career. John decided to try cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, to break the anxiety cycle. With the help of his therapist, he began identifying the negative thought patterns that fueled his anxiety, like thinking, "Everyone is going to judge me," or "I'll mess up and embarrass myself." By using CBT techniques, John started to challenge these thoughts. He practiced saying, "It's okay if I'm not perfect, and most people aren't paying that much attention to me." At the same time, John used exposure therapy. He started small, like attending casual social gatherings for a short time and building up his confidence. Over several months, John's brain started to associate social situations with less fear. His anxiety didn't disappear overnight, but he gradually rewired his brain to see socializing as manageable and even enjoyable. Today, John regularly attends work events and even leads meetings without the intense anxiety that once held him back. Sarah, a 28-year-old teacher, suffered from debilitating panic attacks for years. Her panic attacks would come on suddenly, with her heart racing, her chest tightening, and a feeling of losing control. She often avoided public places like malls or crowded events because she feared having a panic attack in public. This avoidance fed into a vicious cycle of anxiety. After seeking help, Sarah was introduced to mindfulness and breathing techniques. Her therapist taught her the 4-7-8 breathing method, which helps calm the nervous system during stressful moments. Whenever Sarah felt the first signs of a panic attack, she practiced this breathing technique, which helped her prevent full-blown panic. Along with breathing exercises, Sarah started using positive affirmations to reframe her thoughts. Instead of thinking, "I'm going to have a panic attack," she would say, "I am in control of my body, and I can handle this." Over time, these techniques helped Sarah's brain form new pathways. She rewired her response to panic triggers, gradually reducing both the frequency and intensity of her panic attacks. A year later, Sarah was able to visit public places and enjoy social activities again. She still practices mindfulness daily, but her brain no longer reacts to potential triggers with the same fear and anxiety. These stories of John and Sarah show us that while anxiety can feel overwhelming, it is possible to rewire the brain and regain control. Whether it's through cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness, breathing techniques, or exposure therapy, change is within reach. The key is consistency and patience. Your brain is capable of incredible adaptation, and every step you take, no matter how small, brings you closer to breaking free from the anxiety cycle. So, here's your call to action: start with just one technique. Whether it's trying mindfulness for 5 minutes a day, challenging a negative thought, or practicing deep breathing during stressful moments, commit to making small, consistent changes. Over time, these small efforts will add up and lead to lasting transformation. Your brain is ready to change, you just have to give it the tools to do so. Before we wrap up, I want to take a moment to say thank you. Thank you for taking the time to listen, for investing in yourself, and for being open to learning new ways to rewire your mind. The journey to overcoming anxiety isn't easy, but by understanding your brain and working with it, you're already taking powerful steps toward a healthier, calmer you. Remember, every small effort counts, and your brain is capable of incredible transformation. Be kind to yourself throughout this process, and celebrate each step forward. We're all a work in progress, and your commitment to change is the most important part of this journey. Thank you once again, and I wish you continued success and peace on your path to healing.